Enjoyed singing that with you. We're going to be in 1 Samuel again tonight if you want to follow along in the Bible. Chapter 21 is the first place we're going to be there. But as we get started, I actually want to read a few words from one of the Psalms. This from Psalm 69, which is a prayer of David that I think really fits with what we're going to be talking about tonight. And I'm just going to read a few selections from it, but some of it you may recognize as well. Some important verses here. This is what the psalm says. Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in deep mire where there's no foothold. I have come into deep waters, and the flood sweeps over me. I am weary with my crying. My throat is parched. My eyes grow dim with waiting for my God. I want you to hold on to that phrase right there. And this also from verse 7 and 8. It's for your sake that I have borne reproach, that shame has covered my face. I have become a stranger to my kindred, an alien to my mother's children. For I looked for pity, verse 20, but there was none, and for comforters, but I found none. They gave me poison for food, and for my thirst, they gave me vinegar to drink. And that last bit, of course, you may recall from Jesus' story when he's on the cross, and this is what happens for him. I don't really know what was going on in David's life when he wrote these words, but I sure do get the sense that when I read this psalm that David is not where he wants to be. Things are not going like he thought they might go in his life, hence these words in this psalm. And that's kind of what I want to talk about tonight. When was the last time that you said to yourself, this is not where I wanted to be? And when I say that, I'm not talking about sitting in the line at the DMV or, going to get your flu shot or going to your dentist appointment. I'm talking about something more lasting than that. It's the last time you said to yourself, things have not gone like I thought they would at this point in my life. This is not where I wanted to be. Sometimes we encounter times like that, seasons like that in our lives, times that throw us off the path of what we thought we were going to be doing. And it can be really difficult when things like that happen. I remember talking to somebody recently who was telling me about how just as soon as their daughter got to be a junior in high school, bam, his job moved him off to some small West Texas town. And that might not seem like a big deal, but it was a big deal to that junior in high school daughter who'd been in this school growing up and had her friends there. And now there's this unexpected change, and not a welcome one. Not where I wanted to be. There's a guy I went to Bible study with at Harding for a little while. His name was Brandon. He was a pitcher on the baseball team at Harding, and a really good one. In fact, at one point during his Harding baseball career, he got a call from a Major League Baseball team, the Pittsburgh Pirates, wanted him to come out and try out to be a pitcher in the major leagues. But then just a few weeks before his tryout, blew out his arm. Major surgery, full year of recovery and rehab. And eventually he did pitch at Harding again, but, it just never was the same. And I remember him saying to us at Bible study, I'm just so frustrated because I had this plan and here it was so close. I could see it. Now I'm not where I thought I would be. Maybe you've been through a time like that. Chances are at some point in our lives we all go through something like that in one way or another. When we say, this is just not what I had in mind. Maybe someone here tonight is going through a time like that. And in times like that, we may often wonder, what do you do when you're not where you thought you'd be? Well, I think the Bible in its wisdom addresses that question. And one of the ways that it addresses that question is through David. Now, we're continuing tonight in our series on David, Chasing God's Heart. as we look at David's life and also at his prayers. And in my mind, if there's anybody who can relate with that question, things didn't go like I planned, what now? It's got to be David, right? Because do you remember the last time we left off in David's story? Where was he? What was he doing? Do you remember? He was running for his life. He was running from Saul. That was chapters 19 and 20 of 1 Samuel. And guess what? For the next 10 chapters of 1 Samuel, what is David doing? Still running for his life. Still running from Saul. I think for me it can be kind of easy to underestimate or forget just how long the waiting is. How long the struggle is for David in his life. Did you know that David will not actually become king until he's 30 years old? 30 years old before he actually gets this thing that God promised him. And we don't actually know exactly when he started running in his life. We only have just a few details to try to put the puzzle together. But we know he was married. But in Jewish culture in the first century, Jewish boys got married around 18. And we know that his struggles with Saul began. He started to make Saul angry with him during a time in his life when he was considered too young to fight in the army for his people. And he's been on the run for these chapters, and we wonder, how long has it been? Is it far-fetched to think he's been on the run for years? Maybe a decade of his life? Don't really know. But in his prayer, he says, I've become a stranger to my kindred. My eyes grow dim with waiting for my God. Sounds like the kind of person who's taking stock and saying, this is not where I wanted to be. This is not where I thought I would be right now. And in all of that time of running, however long it was, we may not know how long it was, but during that time of running, at least 3 times, things get so bad for David that he's forced not just to run away, but actually to run all the way out of his own country, his own people's lands. He's forced, in a sense, to be a person without a home, a person without a country, a king forced out of his land, and now he's living as an exile in foreign lands. Living in the lands of his enemies. At least 3 times this happens to him. One time it happens to him and he stays at least a year and a half, just about. Year and 4 months, I think it was. Living in foreign lands away from his home. I become a stranger to my kindred. An alien to my mother's children. Isn't that true of him? But tonight it's actually these 3 low points, these 3 lowest of the low moments that I really want to zero in on this evening, because in these 3 stories, when David is not just on the run, but all the way out of his home, pushed away from his people and his place, these have got to be 3 moments when David is saying, this is not where I wanted to be, and yet this man of God in these 3 stories sets such a powerful example of what to do and what God can do when we find ourselves asking those same kind of questions. So I want to take a quick look at each of these 3 stories tonight. The first one, as you can see, is in 1 Samuel 21. And in this story, David flees to a place called Gath. And in this story, I think we learn, in a word, a lesson about opportunity. So take a look at verse 10, chapter 21. David rose and fled that day from Saul, and he went to King Achish of Gath. And just so we're all on the same page here, that city, Gath, is in the land of the Philistines. Now, do you think David wants to be living in the land of the Philistines? Why not? I know you know he doesn't. Why not? Yes.
On top
Okay, good. This is where Goliath is from. The one who taunted their God and taunted their people and taunted David, he's from Gath. That's where he's going to live. And the Philistines are the ones that, in the early part of 1 Samuel, they go and they steal the Ark of the Covenant and they bring it back to their land. The Philistines are the one that the Israelites have been in these constant battles with all throughout 1 Samuel. And not only that, but they don't like David very much, do they? Because he's the one that killed Goliath of Gath. He is the one who routed their armies. And so David's like public enemy number one in Philistia. And yet all of this sets the stage for this humiliating moment. David flees to Gath. And the servants of King Achish said to him, "Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. The implication is, look at him now. Look at how far he's fallen now." So verse 12, David took these words to heart. He was very much afraid of King Achish of Gath, and this is what he does. So he changed his behavior before them. He pretended to be mad when in their presence. He scratched marks on the doors of the gate. He let his spittle run down his beard. And Achish said to his servants, "Look, you see the man is mad. Why then have you brought him to me? Do I lack madmen? Shall this fellow come into my house?" So you get the picture here, right? How pitiful it is. Future king David is having to act like he's gone out of his mind in front of his rivals just to survive. And if I'm him, I've got to be thinking, God, you better have a plan. Because when you anointed me, maybe this was in the fine print, but I don't remember this being a part of the plan. And I'm still waiting. And then when things just seem to be about as bad as they can get, we see that God does have a plan. God does have a plan for David, and even this little humiliating detour may play a part in it. You look at the very start, the very next verses spill over into chapter 22. And it may not look like these are related, but I think that they are. Start of chapter 22, David left there and he escaped to a cave of Adullam. Verse 2, everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him, and he became the captain over them, the captain of the humiliated, the captain of the distressed, discontented. And those who were with him numbered about 400. So suddenly there's this group of people forming around David as their leader. And David can identify with these people. And they can identify with David as their leader because he knows what they're going through. David has just been through this most humiliating moment for him, and now God gives him the opportunity to lead people who have been through distress, people who are discontented. And I have to wonder, why is it that they're so drawn to him? Because of what he's overcome? Because of what they have in common? Suddenly, David has this opportunity to care for these people that very much need him. I was thinking about that baseball player I told you about, Brandon, who went to the Bible study with us. When I met him at Bible study, he was dealing with that great disappointment in his life. But he was not the only one in our Bible study group who was going through a time like that. In fact, I think I may have told you before about this person who was in our group named Barbara. She had just a year or two earlier, she was the wife of a preacher in town who unexpectedly had a heart attack and passed away. He was, in his, must have been late 40s, early 50s, just total surprise to everyone. She was not at all where she expected to be. But she was a part of our Bible study group. And Alyssa and I have talked later about how the best thing we gained from that Bible study group was not the lessons we learned, but watching Barbara and her unshakable faith and wisdom during that tough time. And anybody there who was going through one of those times that they're saying to themselves, this is not where I thought I would be, they could look to Barbara and be strengthened because of her faith. She had these unexpected trials, and they brought unexpected opportunities to strengthen the faith of others. And that, of course, doesn't change the hard part, but it also doesn't stop God from doing good. And that's what God did through Barbara. I think that's what God is doing through David in these stories, because what I see here is that even though he's in a moment where he's saying, look, Lord, this is not how I saw things going, still he keeps his eyes open. We may not be where we thought we'd be, but that doesn't mean that God might not give us opportunities to use where we are for good. So that's the first thing I learned from David in his foreign lands. A lesson about opportunity. On the same note, the second lesson we learned from David, I think, as he's pushed out of his homeland, again, a lesson about responsibility. And this is kind of the other side of the coin from that lesson about opportunity, because what we see is that even when things aren't going like David wanted them to, like he maybe thought that they would, that doesn't mean that David stops caring for those who need him. It's not just that he has the opportunity to, but he feels that he should care for those who need him. Even though life has thrown him this great curveball, and it may actually limit his ability to care like he wants to, he still takes care of people in the ways that he can. He's not just thinking about himself. Maybe looking at what he does next will show you what I mean. So verse 3, the very next verse in that story where we just left off, David then went from there to Mizpah of Moab. So you're noticing again, he's not in Israel. He's still on the run. This time he's in Moab. He's still living in foreign lands. And what does he do there? Still in this time of great upheaval in his life. Would have been really easy to become very self-absorbed in this moment. But what do we see David doing? When he went to Mizpah, he went and said to the king of Moab, "Please let my father and mother come to you until I know what God will do for me." David is in danger. He maybe feels that his family also may be in danger. And so this is what he does. Verse 4, he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold, all the time that David is on the run. In other words, David, in his moment of distress here, continues to think about others, and he goes out of his way to make these arrangements for his father and his mother. And of course, in my mind now, I'm thinking also about another man in the Bible who does something like this. Thinking about Jesus. You remember when he's on the cross in the Gospel of John, and his first words from the cross in the Gospel of John are not about himself. Jesus first speaks on behalf of his mother, makes sure that his mother is cared after when he faces this time of need. Maybe there's something we can learn from the attitudes of these two men, Jesus and David here, because they're affected by these trials, these really difficult things going on. They may not be able to care for their parents in the way that they want to, but they sure do what they can. And it's clear to me that neither one of them has just simply stopped thinking about those who need them. David has not thrown up his hands and just said, "Woe is me." He remembers those who need him. He takes care of them. Maybe we can learn a little bit from this example. There are people in our lives at every stage in life who need our help. Also, we have a responsibility to one another in God's church, and that maybe is the one that's maybe easier to forget. I know for me, sometimes it takes far, far less than what David is going through for me to start saying, woe is me, and thinking less about others who need me. Maybe what I can give to help them. I'll give you an example of this. It's not a very profound example. But not too long ago, there was a player for the Dallas Mavericks. We don't speak his name in the Meade household. It's a sore subject. But he got really unhappy about the opportunities that he was given on the team. He felt that he should be playing more, and he wasn't. He felt that when he was out there, he ought to be doing more, but coach wasn't letting him do it. And so he felt like he was just getting a really bad deal here. And so he got so frustrated that right in the middle of a game at halftime, he quit and left the team in a playoff game. And they lost the game, and they lost the series because they needed him. They needed him to play. They needed everybody on that team to play. But when things weren't going like he thought that they should, he quit and he left, and it cost more than just him. And he got into this kind of woe is me thing. I should be doing more, and he was out of there. But everybody hurt because of what he did. The Meade family hurt because of what he did, watching the Mavs lose. Maybe there's something about that we can learn as well. When we find ourselves in, those times in life like David, when it would be easy to just focus on me, maybe we can also remember the people that still need us. Feel that sense of responsibility for one another, the people who need our help. It's challenging to me. So the first lesson is opportunity. The second lesson, responsibility. And then the last one from David's time in foreign lands, a lesson about loyalty. This is 1 Samuel 27, so we're skipping a little bit ahead in the story here, if you're still following along in your Bible. David is back in Gath again, back in that same city he was the first time when he was pretending to be mad in order to survive. He's back there again. But by this time, David has been on the run for so long that the same king there, King Achish, kind of sort of welcomes him into his land. I have to think that Achish is thinking about David at this point that, well, he must have given up on his people now. They've been trying to kill him for so long, and he's been on the run for so long. There's no way he's going back to them now. And so Achish sees this mighty warrior, David, and he gives him land in Philistia, land to live on. And I kind of think maybe he's building up to trying to use David to fight against his own people, to fight against his people Israel, because after all, they've already disowned him, right? I mean, why else would their king be chasing him all across the country trying to kill him? Why would he care about them anymore? And yet David, though his own people seem to have abandoned him or chasing him around the country trying to kill him, he's not going to fight against them. He's not fighting against the people of Israel. Instead, David uses that time that he's in Philistine country to actually go out and secretly protect God's people Israel. So he goes out, verse 8, he and his men, and they make these raids on the Geshurites and the Girzites and the Amalekites. These are just other enemies of Israel who are trying to bring harm to them. And David is just going out in secret and defending his own people. Why does he do that? Because David is loyal to his God. And David is loyal to God's people. He always has been about protecting them. But before, they used to sing his praises for the things that he did. Now, they may not even know what he's doing. They just go on thinking of him as a traitor, as the one who left, is living with the enemy now. But do you think that matters to David? Maybe it matters to him, but he's not going to let praise or cursing, either one, keep him from doing right by his people and his God. And that might be the hardest lesson of all of these stories for me. We read a minute ago from the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus teaches his disciples there to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Because if you love those who love you, Jesus kind of says, all right, great. If you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? David chooses a much, much harder path. He loyally protects and defends God's people, even though they may not have the highest opinion of him and may not even know what he's doing on their behalf. He bears their burdens, takes care of them so that they can live. And of course, many years later in time, Jesus is going to do the same and even more for those who would put him up on the cross. So we have these three things: loyalty, responsibility, opportunity. This is what David chooses to do when he's not where he wanted to be in life. And these three things challenge me even when I am where I want to be in life. But it's quite a remarkable example of what God can do through a person who's willing to follow him, even when the things he's going through are far, far from perfect. God uses him in amazing ways. Maybe we're challenged by this. Maybe we're challenged when we go through unexpected circumstances to keep our eyes open. May not make what we're going through easier, but we can keep our eyes open to the fact that God might do good through us. Maybe we're challenged to remember those that need us when it's a whole lot easier to just think about me. Maybe even start to throw up my hands and say, woe is me. Maybe there's a time for that. But there's also people that need us too. People we should look after. Maybe we're challenged to do for others what is right, whether they thank us for it or not, praise us for it or not, or even notice that we're doing it. That's what David does. And of course, these are all things that Jesus does as well on our behalf. When he came to this world and he lived among us, we're told that he was numbered among the transgressors, became like us, saw it as an opportunity to relate with us, deal with our problem of sin. It wasn't really his responsibility to deal with sin. He hadn't sinned, and yet he took that responsibility on for those who needed it. And of course, we know that he was going to do what needed to be done no matter what, even when they put him on a cross. Maybe it's that part of the story that speaks to you tonight, and maybe someone here is ready to respond to what Jesus has done for us when things didn't go as they should have, and yet God made it exactly how it should have gone, raised him up from the dead. Someone here needs to respond to this message and the story of David, the story of Christ, respond to the gospel. We give this moment to do so while we stand, while we sing.